to the November 17th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. We'll call this meeting to order at 1:02. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, or roll call, please?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start with Chair Escobedo,
Here.
Vice Chair Bonderson,
Here.
Commissioner Bauke,
Here.
Commissioner Higgins, Commissioner Lodge,
Here.
and Commissioner Wardlow is here. Thank you that we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And with that, we'll move on to our preliminary matters, and we'll start with 2A, which is requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of X agenda items. Ms. DeBus, do we have any?
Thank you. Chair Escobedo, we have none.
And how about any announcements or appeals?
Also none.
Okay, thank you. And that takes us to 2C, comments from members of the public pertaining to items that are not on today's agenda. Due to time constraints, each person is limited to 2 minutes. I do not have any speaker slips, but Ms. Fennessy, do we have anyone online that would like to give public comment?
Thank you. If you would like to make a remote public comment, please follow the instructions on screen. And I do see one hand raised from Steve Johnson. I will unmute you and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
I hope you can hear me, members of the commission.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to note that I have submitted comments in writing regarding a matter that was supposed to have been scheduled today, regarding an appeal of a finding of incompleteness regarding the top of bank issue. I'm working with staff to resolve the issue in another manner, but I do hope you will read my written comments to make yourself better, more familiar with this matter. And I hope I can bring it up at a later point during the objective standards review. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fennessy, do we have any other remote public commenters?
Thank you. At this time, I do not see any more remote public commenters' hands raised, but we did receive one correspondence letter from Stephen Johnson that was distributed to the Planning Commission prior to this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And so we'll close general public comment and we will move on to item 3. This is 113 Harbor Way, Waterfront Center. And we have Ms. Plummer here to give the staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. My name is Pilar Plummer, and I'm Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara. And also in attendance is Don Sherry, who's the applicant for the project. There isn't a formal staff presentation. It was scheduled as a consent item, but I just kind of want to give a very brief summary of the project. So what's being proposed is conversion of an existing museum gift shop at the harbor to a coffee bar with limited retail space. There's no exterior improvements being proposed, no changes to parking. The project is before you today because it requires a coastal development permit. The existing museum gift shop has a parking requirement of 1 space per 250, and the proposed coffee bar has a parking requirement of 1 space per 100 square feet. Which results in an approximate 4 space increase. City staff reviewed the project and determined that the coffee bar, as it is an ancillary use to the harbor, would not function as a separate draw to the harbor, but will be used by pedestrians already attending the harbor and visiting the museum. So it will not result in increased parking demand. I do have the floor plan for the new coffee bar, which you can see on the screen. So the existing gift shop will be converted to a coffee bar area here and will also retain a portion of retail area. Also, I do want to acknowledge that staff did receive public comment from Brophy Brothers regarding the change of use. And water staff, staff from the water department did have the following regarding the project. So the Waterfront Department was approached by the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum with a proposal to renovate the coffee shop as part of their existing store space. And after a review, the waterfront is supportive of the improvements of the additional small coffee service space within their 597 square foot store. The current lease for the Maritime Museum allows for both food and beverage service, and they're not asking for an increase in square footage or an increase of retail. So the Waterfront Department is supportive of the change of use. And the Waterfront evaluates the balance of uses as part of their 5-year review of leases to determine if visitor serving uses are provided in adequate amounts. The Coastal Land Use Plan encourages the modest expansion of existing coastal-related and visitor-serving facilities in order to support coastal-dependent uses and activities. And I will be here if you have any questions about the project. And then, Ms. Sherry, if you had any additional? Yeah. Perfect. Yes.
Welcome. And if you could just state your name for the record.
I can. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dawn Sherry from Sherry & Associates Architects, and I'm here representing the Maritime Museum's application. Along with me is Greg Gorga, the Executive Director for the museum, and a couple of the board members. As staff outlined, the project is the addition of a coffee bar component to be added to the existing gift store. The gift store operation will continue, but will now accommodate the new coffee bar equipment and point of sale within the existing lease space. No exterior alterations are proposed. The Maritime Museum approached our office for this project because they are always looking for new ways to drive traffic to the museum, to increase admissions, add new members, and provide more support for their ever-expanding education programs and exhibits. It also provides a better utilization of the scenic patio area in front of the gift shop that the museum rents from the city. Converting a small portion of the museum store retail space accomplishes all of these goals. As we have been navigating the permit process, we have closely worked with the City of Santa Barbara Waterfront Department to confirm the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing components of the construction. We submitted construction documents to the city building department, assuming we were exempt from the coastal development permit based on the gift shop remaining as a gift shop and no intensification of use. We found out only after we submitted to the building department that a CDP was required. It was explained to us, and as Pilar explained to you, that because the parking for a coffee shop, even if it's only a portion of the existing use, is required to be calculated at 1 per 100 in lieu of the 1 per 250 required for retail. It was this intensification of parking that triggered the CDP and the reason we are here today. As mentioned, the coffee bar is designed entirely within the existing gift shop, and the existing use as gift shop is still the intended use of the space. With the coffee component, it is the museum's hope that more people might be drawn to the gift shop, order coffee, enjoy the patio, shop in the gift store, and even visit the Maritime Museum as well. One final note I want to point out is that only this morning I was informed, all of us, only this morning were informed that Brophy Brothers was opposing the coffee bar, and it was a surprise to all of us because I was told that the museum did reach out to them prior to moving forward with their proposal and prior to retaining our firm to proceed with the application. In closing, I just want to reiterate that the reason the museum wants the coffee bar is to draw more people to the museum and everything it has to offer, and not to take away from their neighbors with whom they have a long history of supporting. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And now we will open up public comment on this item. We do not have any speaker slips, but Ms. Fennessy, do we have anyone online that would like to give public comment?
Thank you. If you'd like to make a remote public comment, please follow the instructions on screen. And at this time, I do not see any hands raised. We did receive one letter of written correspondence from John Bennett, and that was distributed to the Planning Commission prior to this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And I'm going to ask Ms. Ostringer, because we don't get many consent items, what the process is. Do I handle it normally with questions and comments, or just entertain a motion off the bat.
Chair Escobedo, it's at your discretion. Since it is a consent item, you can just request a motion for the staff recommendation, or you could open it up to your colleagues for questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up to my colleagues if they have any questions. Commissioner Higgins?
To staff or the applicant, does this item go to the Harbor Commission at all?
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. So yes, in terms of the Harbor Commission, since they're not asking for a change of lease, it's still going to be operated by the museum. This project, if the coastal development permit were to be approved, would go to Harbor Commission for informational purposes only. If they were to change their lease in the future so that the coffee bar were to be operated by a separate tenant, that would go to the Harbor Commission for recommendation to council for the lease.
To Ms. Sherry, do you understand? Have you been told by the Harbor folks that you need to amend your lease? Okay, that's my question.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Ms. Pilar, we received the letter from John Bennett of Brovey and Sons Incorporated, who is strongly opposed to this proposal and was shocked to hear it was even considered at this time. In addition, please clarify if the master plan, current and proposed leases, is no longer in effect and not going to be enforced. Could you fill us in on what he's referring to there?
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. I don't have the exact language from the public comment. However, this particular project was reviewed for consistency with the local coastal program, coastal land use plan guidance, and city staff, as well as the waterfront, felt that the project is consistent with policies, and that's included in the staff report and applicable policies as an attachment to the staff report. Does that answer your question?
Not exactly. Could you tell me what master plan is Mr. Bennett referring to?
There is the harbor master plan, and then within our local coastal land use plan, we have specific harbor policies which document operations for the harbor as well as encouraged uses. So for example, the harbor encourages coastal dependent uses as well as visitor serving uses, such as a coffee bar.
And was this referred to by staff? Did they look at it in considering this
City
proposal?
staff reviewed this for consistency with the local coastal land use plan. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Vice Chair Bonderson?
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of Commissioner Lodge's question because my question is very similar, but I'm coming at it from another angle. I understand that the project is consistent with the policies and the local coastal land use plan and so on, but my specific interest is to understand whether the city has any influence on the use and does it take competitiveness into any consideration when looking at the application.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. As I previously mentioned, the current lease for the Maritime Museum allows for both food and beverage services. The waterfront department didn't feel like this was an expansion beyond what their current lease allows. That was reviewed as part of our internal review and for consistency with the coastal land use plan. Does that answer your question, or is there a...
I suppose the clarity that I'm trying to gain here is perhaps to address any concerned members of the public, including Mr. Bennett. I want to make sure that his concern is addressed because it's of interest to me, and certainly I would assume to others, is whether or not the city has the influence to comment or to direct uses when there's a type of competition, a business competition in the adjacent area, such as his coffee shop being directly impacted. How do we address this question? Do we have any influence whatsoever on that?
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. So this particular project, again, if the CDP, the Coastal Development Permit, were to be approved, it will go to Harbor Commission, who has authority to review the uses at the harbor. And they can make recommendations to City Council about the leases and uses at the harbor. So yes.
That did clarify. Thank you, Ms. Plummer. I appreciate the clarity. That concludes my questions for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. Commissioner Balke.
Mr. Chair, I've got one question for staff, which is, if I'm correct, I'm reading the staff report, you're talking that this is an intensification that's being proposed, and because of that, there'd be a demand under the code for 4 additional parking spaces. And you're saying because the 4 spaces can be handled in the overall parking system of the harbor, it meets the requirements of the code.
That's correct.
Okay. Oh, that's my one question. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Balke. All right, so with that, I will entertain a motion from the commission. Commissioner Higgins?
Motion to make the findings and approve the project.
Second.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Higgins, a second from Commissioner Balke. Any discussion on the motion?
I have a comment.
Yes, Commissioner Higgins.
So to Commissioner Balke's comment or question about parking, the only reason there's theoretically an increase in demand is because we haven't amended our zoning code yet in the coastal zone to take the parking requirement up to 1 for 250. It remains 1 for 100 in the coastal zone. So it's not really, that's the logic, but it's not really an increase in demand. But that's more of just a poke at our city to get something to the Coastal Commission, but not you all, of course, City Council.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Balke, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I had one comment, and it goes back to sort of some of the stuff we discussed in the funk zone and the harbor. You know, we're looking at parking system-wide for an area here, and therefore it works. But in the funk zone, we don't have anything like that. In downtown, we don't have a system-wide analysis of all the parking and demands that allow for intensifications that without variances or modifications, in which a lot of times get denied. So my suggestion, and I think I brought this up last time, is we need to create these systems for all those planning areas, because we don't need any more parking spaces than we physically need to meet the demands. And as my commissioner adjacent to me noted last time, is, you know, Uber and other things are changing how parking is, for especially areas like the funk zone, are going to be handled. And you know, I would, if I was going to the funk zone, I'd take an Uber just because I don't want to get a DUI. Okay, as an example. Okay, so yeah, things have changed. We really need to start looking at these things holistically. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Balke. And I don't see any other comments. I'll just say I support those 2 comments. So with that, Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. I'll start with Commissioner Balke,
Yes.
Commissioner Higgins,
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bonderson,
Yes.
and Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And I'm going to wait. There's a 10-day appeal period for this project. I only get to do that a couple more times. And so with that, thank you to the applicant team. Thank you to Ms. Plummer for being here. And we will close that item. And I will introduce the next item, and then we will get a brief recess But we will move on to item 4. It's a new item. It's accessory dwelling unit ordinance amendments. And we are going to take a brief recess. It is 1:22. We will come back at 1:27. Thank you. We are now in recess. ordinance amendments, and we will turn it over to Ms. Ferguson. Welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Escobedo and Commissioners. My name is Jillian Ferguson, and I'm a long-range assistant planner for the Community Development Department. May I also introduce Brenda Beltz, project planner and plan checker, and Dan Gullett, interim city planner. I also requested that Ryan DeJulio, the city's fire battalion chief, be present to address any questions regarding ADUs in the city's high fire hazard areas. This afternoon, I will be presenting the city's accessory dwelling unit ordinance amendments. The purpose of this hearing is to review the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance for ADUs and JADUs and request your commission forward a recommendation to City Council for adoption. I will briefly provide a background for ADUs, then present the proposed ADU ordinance amendments. These amendments have been organized into 3 categories: cleanup items, 2023 state requirements, and finally, staff proposed local standards, which will be discussed in more detail. I will then go over some next steps. Just a quick reminder that ADUs are a self-contained additional housing unit which range in size from 150 square feet for an efficiency studio unit to 1,200 square feet for a unit with multiple bedrooms. According to State Housing and Community Development, or HCD, ADUs are an innovative, affordable, effective option for adding much-needed housing in California. A junior ADU is a unit located within existing walls of a primary residence, including within an attached garage, that cannot exceed 500 square feet in size. The owner must occupy the rest of the house, and the JADU requires a separate exterior entrance. ADUs can either include detached, attached, or constructed above an existing or new garage, or be constructed using converted livable space within the primary residence, or converted non-livable space such as a garage or accessory building. The city's ADU ordinance allows 2 different types of ADUs, standard ADUs and special ADUs. Standard ADUs are allowed 1 per lot and are not allowed in the foothill and extreme foothill high fire hazard areas. Standard ADUs differ from special ADUs by having greater size and height flexibility. The size of a standard ADU may range from 850 to 1,200 square feet if detached, or a maximum of 50% of existing primary unit floor area if attached. Currently, the maximum height of a standard ADU may match the primary unit's height, or 17 feet, whichever is greater, and in some cases up to 30 feet in height if constructed over a garage. Regarding open yard standards, a standard ADU needs to retain the open yard for the primary unit, but the open yard can be reduced in area and dimension, and there is location flexibility. A special ADU is mandated by state law, and 1 or more may be allowed per lot depending on the existing number of units. Special ADUs are the only ADUs allowed in the foothill and extreme foothill high fire areas. A special ADU may be a new detached unit or a conversion of existing floor area. Currently, a maximum size of 800 square feet is allowed if detached in new construction, with a maximum of 16 feet in height. Special ADUs are also exempt from the requirement to preserve the open yard for the primary unit. ADU applications have been very popular. Since 2017, the city has received 916 ADU applications. Of those, 22% are detached, 12% are attached additions, and 66% consist of conversions. This map demonstrates the number, locations, and type of ADU projects since 2017. Please note the pink areas highlighted are the city's high fire hazard zones, and the city's coastal zone boundary designated by the solid blue line. Here is a map showing the number of ADUs within the city's high fire areas. 19% of ADUs are within the foothill and extreme foothill areas. ADUs in high fire areas must be designed to meet high fire construction standards as determined by the fire code official. Now I will discuss the proposed ADU ordinance amendments. The scope of the amendments include both the inland and coastal zoning ordinances. As previously mentioned, there are 3 categories of proposed changes: cleanup items, which include minor changes to wording, formatting, or location; state mandated requirements that include new or changed content consistent with 2023 state law requirements; and amendments to local standards to facilitate ADUs, which are consistent with the 2023 draft housing element. The focus of this presentation will be on the amendments to maximum height for ADUs and changes to local standards. The other categories of changes, due to their minor nature, are not discussed in this presentation. Now I will discuss required and recommended building height changes. So one of the more significant changes made to the state ADU law is related to maximum building height. The city's current ADU height regulations are less restrictive than state law for standard ADUs and are the same as state law for special ADUs. The changes required by state law allow a range of heights from 16 feet to 25 feet, depending on if the unit is attached, detached, zoned for single unit or multi-unit, or within half mile of a high-quality transit corridor. Staff recommends blending the current height standards with state law changes to increase the allowed height for certain ADUs. For a standard detached ADU, staff recommends increasing the maximum height limit from 17 to 18 feet citywide. In addition, an attached ADU may now be built up to 25 feet in height. A special detached ADU will be increased in height from 16 to 18 feet to be consistent with state law. Limiting special ADUs to 1 story and 2 bedrooms is proposed to reduce the size and intensity of ADUs in fire-prone neighborhoods. It is also intended to address privacy concerns for adjacent properties when 2 special ADUs are proposed, especially given the state-mandated 4-foot interior setback. Here are some examples of the different ways that ADUs can be built in compliance with maximum height standards. Example 1 shows an existing 2-story primary unit that is allowed to have a 2-story detached standard ADU of the same height. Example 2 shows an existing 1-story primary unit that is allowed to have a 1-story detached standard or special ADU up to 18 feet in height. Examples 3 and 4 show an attached standard ADU that is the same height as the primary unit, or 25 feet, whichever is greater. Example 5 and 6 show how an existing 1-story primary unit may still have a 2-story standard ADU if it is either constructed over a garage or through the discretionary design review process. Now I will discuss proposed changes to local standards. As previously mentioned, the 3rd category of proposed amendments include minor improvements to local requirements intended to make it easier to build ADUs. These changes will implement the city's draft housing element policy recommendations for ADUs. The first staff recommendation is a revised open yard encroachment. When proposing an ADU over a 2-car garage, we revised the open yard standards to accommodate a small laundry room or storage area. A maximum 150 square foot addition is proposed to be allowed to encroach into the open yard area that serves the primary residence. Please see this example demonstrating the new open yard reduction amendment. In yellow is a proposed 2-car garage with an ADU above. Based on the lot size, this ADU is allowed to reduce the required 1,250 square foot open yard for the primary residential unit to 800 square feet, seen in green as 2 400 square foot segments. With this new open yard reduction, a maximum 150 square foot storage room addition is also allowed, shown in red. The next staff recommended change regards converted non-livable space. Under the current rules, If two new ADUs are proposed for a multi-unit development, the double ADU must either be detached new construction or the lots must be developed with at least 8 existing dwelling units. This is because the current law only allows 25% of the existing number of units to be converted from existing floor area. Staff recommends allowing up to 2 special ADUs instead of 1 to be converted from existing floor area. This will allow the conversion of an existing garage or basement to 2 special ADUs instead of requiring new construction. Here is a converted non-livable floor area example. This is an existing multi-unit building. The area of work proposed is 2 ADUs located in the garage area. The current ADU rules allow only 1 ADU to be converted in the garage. Or they could propose 2 new ADUs that take up the entire open yard area. This proposed standard would allow 2 ADUs to be located within the garage, thereby preserving the open yard. The final staff recommended change involves the conversion of upper floor commercial areas to ADUs. State law allows residential floor area to be converted to ADUs, but it does not allow commercial floor area, such as retail or office, to be converted. Amendments to the city's local ordinance would allow upper floor commercial spaces to be converted to ADUs and provide more flexibility in the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. Staff recommends only the upper floor areas, not the ground floor commercial spaces, be allowed to convert to an ADU to support and maintain mixed-use development along commercial corridors. Now I will share next steps. After your recommendation, we are scheduled to go to Ordinance Committee on December 6th, followed by City Council in January. We will then submit the adopted ordinance amendments to HCD for their review. We will also start preparing a local coastal program amendment for the adopted Title 28 amendments for California Coastal Commission certification. Regarding the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA does not apply to adoption of an ordinance implementing the state accessory dwelling unit law. So staff recommends reviewing the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance for Title 28 and Title 30 for accessory dwelling units and forwarding a recommendation to City Council for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and so with that, we will open up public comment. We don't have any in-person speaker slips, but Ms. Fennessy, do we have any remote public commenters?
Thank you. If you would like to make a remote public comment, please follow the instructions on screen. And we have one raised hand, and I'll start with Stephen Johnson. I'll unmute you, and you have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Members of the commission, thank you for this opportunity to comment. I've commented twice before at hearings regarding ADUs on a somewhat minor point, but could have problematic consequences. I do not believe the city's code is compliant with California ADU code, specifically subdivision E of 65852.2. Subdivision E starts off with the language notwithstanding subdivisions A to D, meaning ignore everything in the previous sections from A to D. Section E must be complied with regardless of the previous sections. That point is made also in the California HCD ADU handbook. That view is also reinforced by the chief zoning administrator for the city of Los Angeles. In all those references, they note that there is no maximum size to ADUs added to, detached ADUs added to rental property. This is indeed a giant loophole, but it's been recognized by the city of Los Angeles, the city of San Francisco, the city of Palo Alto, and other cities that have received review letters. My time is running out, so I cannot make comments about suggested remediation, but I do recommend the city attorney review this concern of mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fennessy, do we have any other remote public commenters?
Thank you. At this time, I do not see any more hands raised, and we did receive 5 public comment letters that were distributed to the commission prior to this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. So we'll turn it back to the commission, and we have Vice Chair Bonderson followed by Commissioner Bauke.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. I would like to start with literally asking the question to our city attorney that Mr. Johnson just presented. I was quite intrigued by his public comment letter, and I'm curious to know how the city responds or addresses this concern. Is it true from our legal standpoint that the city's limits are inconsistent with the state law?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Bonderson, we've looked at Mr. Johnson's concerns, and we believe that our ordinance is consistent. It's been submitted to HCD, and they haven't commented that they felt that it was inconsistent. There hasn't been this change between our existing ordinance and now.
Thank you. And in the event that it is later found to be inconsistent, does that put our decisions here or future decisions by city council into any type of jeopardy? Or is it something that would be revisited in the event that it does come to light?
Chair Escobedo, Vice Chair Bonderson, it doesn't jeopardize the decisions. It would just, we wouldn't apply that code section and it would revert to state law.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. So I have a few questions. And before I begin, I would like to personally commend Ms. Ferguson for her presentation. This is the first time I've had the pleasure of hearing you present, and it was very clear and concise. I sincerely appreciate a presentation like this, and the slides were very useful. Thank you for taking the time to organize the presentation so nicely. I would like to start by having you, if you don't mind, having you put a slide back on the screen so I can directly ask a question about the image. And I'd like to start with the image of the ADU building height example 1 and 2, if you don't mind.
Commissioner Bonderson, bear with me.
No problem. I assume you're pulling it up.
That can't be right. I don't know how to do this.
I could ask my questions without the image if you would like. let me know if you're stuck with the projection and we could proceed otherwise. Oh, look at that. Okay, perfect timing.
Commissioner Bonderson, I think we're in business.
You are. I can see it on my screen. We could actually start on the slide immediately prior. It's the slide that's called local standards for height. There you go. I think it's number 15. Excellent. Thank you. I just wanted a little clarity on the second bullet point, the standard attached ADU, the height being increased to 25 feet. Is this to match the maximum height allowed for the existing structure on the site, or the single-family dwelling in this case that may be on site?
That's a great question, Commissioner Bonderson. So not exactly. There can be an existing primary unit that is less than 25 feet. So for example, there could be an existing primary unit that's 17 feet. But with this state law change, attached ADUs can now be up to 25 feet, exceeding the height of the primary. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. It does. Does that include on properties where there's a slope that's more than 10 feet as well, or is that following a different set of rules?
That's citywide.
Citywide. Now, my question specifically here is, do we as a group, a deciding body, have the ability to amend this so that there are specific regulations that may apply in a sloped property or on a property where privacy may be at stake for a neighboring lot?
Chair Bonderson, another great question. It's my understanding that the city cannot apply its own set of rules since this is a state requirement. But yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you could see me exhale. That's difficult to hear. I would like us to deliberate on that and at least discuss that further as a group. But thank you for the clarification. I'm surprised, but I understand. My next question, if you could just go to the next image, and that was the one I was referring to earlier about examples 1 and 2. Thank you. And I can see here in example 2 that the top of the pitch of the roof line of the ADU is higher than the primary unit. What is the logic behind this? Is this just taking place because it's state mandated without design being associated with it?
So, Commissioner Bonderson, if I'm understanding your question correctly, regarding example 2, current standards allow an ADU to either meet the height of the existing structure or the floors of the existing structure, or be up to 17 feet currently. We're now proposing this 18-foot height allowance. That said, the ADU can now exceed the height of a primary existing unit if it is less than now 18 feet.
And to follow up with that, is that change specifically because the state has mandated and therefore the city doesn't have the ability to have a different opinion on this?
Yes, Chair Bonderson, or excuse me, Commissioner Bonderson.
It's vice chair, that might be why you're mixing it up. It's okay, I don't mind. Call me whatever.
So it's kind of tricky because the state is allowing standard and special ADUs or ADUs to be constructed up to 18 feet in height. But for standard ADUs or ADUs, I shouldn't remove the standard and special. For ADUs that are within a half mile of a high transit corridor or high transit stop, those units are allowed per the state this 18-foot allowance. But we are proposing, the staff is proposing that we allow this citywide.
Got it. That actually leads directly to my next question, but before I go there, let me conclude this question. My understanding is in some of our areas, in some of the jurisdictions we have, ADUs may go to a design body, not all of them. Does the design body have a position to potentially discuss that this pitch or this design, making it taller than the existing structures on the site, may be inconsistent with their design review? Do we have that power in the city?
So since this is a state requirement, I believe we don't, but I'd like to defer your question to Brenda Beltz and perhaps even Tava to weigh in a little bit more.
Hello, Vice Chair Bonderson. Just maybe
Oh.
to clarify that point is, if they were to exceed the 18 feet, like let's say they wanted to go up to 20 feet.
No. I was speaking more about design. So let's say they meet the 18 feet or they meet an example of something that is similar to what's on the screen here. And aesthetically, the design body doesn't particularly like the design. Do they have any say over that height or that pitch of the roof that would make it more consistent with the design of the neighborhood, or are we just locked into that height?
So ADUs are exempt from design review if they meet the ministerial criteria. There's like 10 or 11 sort of yes, no check boxes for ministerial approval. So if they meet all those criteria, then they wouldn't be subject to design review. If for some reason they didn't meet that criteria, then yes, design review could comment on the roof pitch.
Thank you. That's exactly the answer I was expecting to hear. I appreciate the clarification.
Okay.
And that takes me to the other question that happened to just come up here. And that was with regard to the relationship between the closest transportation, bus stop or whatnot, and height. Why are the two related? What does one have to do with the other?
Yeah. Commissioner Bonderson, I've brought up a map here that I have as a backup slide here that provides the definition, the state's definition of a major transit stop. And if I might just read this aloud, it's the intersection of two or more major bus routes with a frequency of service interval of 15 minutes or less during the morning and afternoon peak commute periods. And a high-quality transit corridor is a corridor with fixed route bus service with service intervals no longer than 15 minutes during peak commute hours. So that said, it's this stop and this corridor differs from a bus stop. So throughout the city, we have several bus stops that don't meet the definition of a major transit stop. So here on this map, you'll see the two blue circles that highlight the areas within the city that are within a half mile of a major transit stop or a high-quality transit corridor, and it's a significant portion of the city. So that was that is we saw this as evidence to go ahead and recommend that the city allow this 18-foot allowance citywide.
I understand the placement of it. I was just interested in understanding what is the relationship with height? Is it just because it's state mandated that they gave you a height? They've just dictated that if it's in this vicinity, then therefore you have the extra height? Or is that extra height used for something else? Is there something else we can do? Can we put more units under that roof and have 2 floors of units? Or, I mean, what is the purpose of having the extra height? Is it just arbitrary?
Mr. Gullett?
Chair Escobedo, thank you, and Vice Chair Bonderson. We asked the same question to the legislature, actually. We had a comment letter on the proposed bill. So I haven't seen it explicitly explained anywhere, but I would guess that you're on the right path. Like, it may be that additional bedrooms could be provided within that extra height.
Okay, well, curiosity killed the cat, right? Here we are asking questions that we may never have the answers to. And that actually smoothly leads into my next question. It was also a comment on one of the public commenters' letters. Could you please explain more clearly for us, and if I have this wrong, please correct me if I understood it incorrectly. My understanding is that we can have an ADU that has 2 stories, but we cannot have 2 separate ADUs that are stacked. Is that true in all cases, or is it true in some cases, or not true at all?
Commissioner
And that
Bonderson.
Yeah, and I just want to add, it might be useful to put up the image you had for ADU building height 3 and 4, I believe might have covered an image like that.
Sure, I will pull up that slide, but if I may, I'd like to defer your question to Brenda Beltz.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bonderson, just could you clarify, is this the slide you're interested in seeing?
Yes, this one's fine. It's 5 and 6. I think 3 and 4 may have been similar in some ways, but my curiosity was about maybe it's the labeling, or maybe it's the way that I read the staff report and the questions that were provided by public comment. Is it true that you can have a 2-level ADU, like in the example number 6, but you can't have 2 separate ADU units that would serve 2 separate families?
Oh, go back to the other slide with the 2 pictures. The stack.
So in example 3 and or example 6, I'm curious to know if it would be ADU 1 on 1 story and ADU 2 on a 2nd story? That question could apply to example 1 as well. Or in this picture, the 2-story special ADU, can they be 2 separate units if you have the floor plan and the height to support 2 units?
So Vice Chair Bonderson, this slide here shows an 18-foot 1-story ADU and then what could be an 18-foot 2-story ADU. And what staff is proposing for special ADUs, which would be your 2 or more ADUs, is that it would only be 1 story. So staff is proposing that you could not stack them the way this is shown. That could be something that your commission discusses if you feel otherwise. But our proposal is for multiple ADUs, they could only be 1 story and up to 18 feet in height. So like the picture on the right with the red building.
Okay, and so in other words, the one on the left, the 2-story stacked, your recommendation, staff's recommendation is you wish not to see that?
That's correct, yes. We did that to address privacy concerns for neighboring
Thank you.
properties. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. This explanation with this image is very useful, Ms. Beltz. I appreciate it. And I'd like to open that up during deliberations to our commission to discuss. I'm going to move on. I have a question about the JADUs. I saw it on the list on the slide and also in the staff report that we have the ability to share a bathroom in a junior ADU, but they're required to have a full kitchen, or a small full kitchen. I was curious to understand the purpose of a shared bathroom, because that would give access to the house. What is the thought process behind that that design?
Hello, Vice Chair Bonderson. So that's just the language from the state law for JADUs. I think they just are trying to make it easier for people to propose these small, sort of within the existing footprint units. So they're allowed to share a bathroom. They don't have to have a full kitchen. They're allowed to have what's called an efficiency kitchen, which is a microwave, a mini fridge, and a hot plate. So it's not It's not a full kitchen. They can do a full kitchen if they want, but they're not required to.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm glad you put the slide up because the moment I saw it, I realized I was wrong. That's very helpful.
Okay.
And so quickly moving on, I have another question and it has to do with zoning. I don't know who is best equipped to answer this question, but when we were, the presentation you just provided talks about so many, in my opinion, quite positive recommendations. One thing I don't see though, as part of the local amendments or the local standards we're trying to discuss here today, is how certain zoning limits the opportunity to develop ADUs. And I'm wondering if there's any opportunity for the city to revisit some of the definitions of zoning throughout the city. And I mean that carefully. Please don't misunderstand where I'm going with this. I'll give you a very specific example. Just this year alone, I've had 2 projects that came in for ADUs. I was hired to do an ADU, only to find out that the property was literally one, like the property line was the division between one zone where they could do the ADU and their zone, which they could not. They're literally sharing the property line with the zone that can. How much flexibility do we have without charging a homeowner the cost of modifications and going to show or other types of zoning modification type applications asking for that sort of flexibility? Is there any chance that we could address that in this ADU ordinance?
Vice Chair Bonderson, most zones allow ADUs if there's an existing or proposed residential unit on the lot. So the only zones that don't would be like the industrial zone. So is that?
I suppose I should make it, without going into any specifics about the projects that I am familiar with, I don't want to take anyone's time. I would just say that the requirements become so complex that in both cases, the homeowner had to basically pass up the opportunity to add an extra unit, and their purpose was to add housing. And so we're losing these opportunities for housing. And I in my line of work as a practitioner, I see it often. It may not even come to your knowledge because I can't submit the application to you because the homeowner gives up. And I just feel like that's such a pity, truly. So I was wondering if there's any type of process amendment that we could discuss here today that would make those types of exceptions easier and more supportable for a homeowner to take into consideration when finding themselves in this type of constraint. And in other words, I'll add one more sentence. In other words, there are options. I know the city provides excellent options, but they come at a cost. And a lot of the time, at least from my personal experience, the homeowner doesn't want to spend the extra money because they're already spending a lot of money. And so that extra application, that extra cost, those extra fees become a hindrance. And so we lose opportunities to have more housing. Is there an opportunity to improve the review process for something such as an exception when it's so close?
If I could maybe rephrase, because I think I know what you're getting at.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah. In the purview of what we're discussing today in terms of ADU ordinance amendments, are we limited to what's in the staff report in terms of suggestions from staff and pertaining to state law, or are we able to tackle ADU ordinance language, period, if it's in there, and changing other language outside of kind of what's in the staff report? Is that right, Vice Chair Monderson?
Yeah, that actually helps a lot. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo, and thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. So I'd like to defer this question to Tava.
Thank you.
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Bonderson, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so we, in our staff report, we're deliberating over this today because we have state law that's going to go into effect January 1. Then we also have some cleanup items, and we also have some local changes that we want to make based on staff suggestions. The question from Vice Chair Bonderson was, can we explore beyond those 3 categories that are found in our staff report to tackle other areas of ADUs, whether it's process or whether it's other suggestions we have for our local ADU ordinance period. Does that make more sense? I hope. And if you say no, that's we're just looking for guidance on what we should include in our discussions today, in our questioning.
So, well, if it's like a Brown Act question, if that's what where
Yes,
we're going?
yes,
Okay,
correct,
okay.
yes.
So,
Sorry.
if it's related to the ADUs, yes, we can discuss it. If it goes far afield and we're talking about general, like, changes to our zoning, I'll stop it as if I hear something that goes, but so go ahead and discuss what you'd like, and then I'll go from there.
Okay,
But
thank you.
it's agendized for ADU. This is the ordinance. If you want to tweak these ordinance provisions, as long as it's not state mandated, then please do.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Vice Chair Bonderson, does that address your
Thank you,
question?
Chair Escobedo. So I'm going to reserve this question, this discussion for deliberations. I have one final question, I'll be done. And it is going to be nearly verbatim off of one of the public commenters. It is a really good question that I face often. I actually have a project right now that has this exact same configuration. The question is, why is a 5-foot required, why is 5 feet required between buildings? For example, a primary single-family dwelling or a existing garage, if it's attached or detached. Why is there a 5-foot requirement between a building and the proposed ADU when there's a 4-foot setback? Because in some of the properties that we see throughout the city, if a neighbor has an older legal non-conforming structure on the property line, the space between the new ADU and that existing structure on the other side of the property line would be therefore 4 feet. The question is, why can't the minimum space between all structures be 4 feet? Or how do we address the fact that the existing structure on the other side of the property line, which doesn't belong to the homeowner who's doing the work, how do we address that difference, the 5 to 4 feet difference?
Commissioner Bonderson, thank you for your question. So the 5-foot building separation is consistent with current city zoning standards, and the 5-foot separation is to meet fire code separation. And the state set the interior setback at 4 feet. I wonder if, am I missing anything else that maybe? Commissioner Bonderson.
I understand because you're stating a fact, and I completely
Right.
know because I work with it. But I think the question is, if that 5-foot requirement is for fire safety purposes, which by all means, all projects should meet safety purposes, why are we allowing 4 feet? Or is there a discretionary decision within the city review in the event that there is a unique site constraint such as this, where the structure's on the other side of the property line? Do you then require 5 feet in a condition like that? I know the answer is no, but why not? Why are we not addressing that 5-foot safety barrier?
So Vice Chair Bonderson, as you say, if there's some fire safety concern, that will definitely be caught by the building department. The 5-foot separation is our current zoning ordinance distance, so we just kept it the same for consistency, rather than having ADUs have a slightly different standard than every other accessory building. We just kept it the same as what's required for other accessory buildings in the city.
And Commissioner Bonderson, additionally, if there is a structure on the property line or near the property line, those are non-conforming structures. So that wouldn't be permitted under our current zoning ordinance. We do recognize that that situation exists throughout the city, but typically the requirement, if there were, for example, 2 ADUs on opposite property lines, they would have an 8-foot separation, per current standards. It's only if there's an existing structure that's non-conforming.
Believe me when I tell you, I completely understand. I've seen this over and over again this past year or two, and so I'm very familiar. I'm just interested in understanding how it's, handled. And I think if I heard you correctly, we just leave it alone and we allow the 4 feet to that nearest structure, and there's no exception to requiring more. Is that correct? We just leave it alone?
So if I understand your question, if there's an existing building that's closer than 5 feet and they want to convert it, yeah, that would be allowed.
If it's on the opposite side of the property line, we don't have any jurisdiction over what the neighbor does. We're allowed to have 4 feet to that structure, and that's the exception to the fire rule, the 5-foot safety barrier, correct? That's just considered an exception that we design with.
The setback would be 4 feet. The building code may require additional fire protections on that building.
On the new building?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I thank you for your time. I know I nailed you guys with a lot of questions here. But this is such an interesting and important topic. There's so many types of projects, and each are so different from the next that these questions are going to be endless. But I appreciate the flexibility and the time you guys spent here today. Thank you. Chair Escobedo?
Thank you.
Appreciate the time you've provided for me.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. Commissioner Balke?
Mr. Chair, she covered a lot of the items I had, but I'm going to loop back. In fact, actually, the last one was one of them on my list. Could we walk through, in a global standpoint, where ADUs are allowed in the city and where they're not, just so people understand that context first, and then I want to get into the discussion about the fire zone requirements, which is an exception.
Commissioner Balke, thank you for your question. So current and proposed ADU regulations allow ADUs to exist wherever residential uses are allowed. That said, special ADUs are only allowed within the foothill and extreme foothill areas within the city. So on this map, you'll see the extreme foothill area is highlighted in red, and that only makes up 1% of the ADU applications that we've had since 2017. The foothill area that's highlighted in orange, those make up about 18%. So in total, 19% of our special ADUs reside in both those areas, the extreme foothill and the foothill.
Okay, following up on that, now what makes a special ADU so special? I mean, that just sort of led me to that question. Is it just because of the high fire hazard area modification is why it's special, or is there something else that makes it special? I'm just trying to understand that.
Yeah, so Commissioner Balke, the state does not allow us to limit ADUs in our high fire hazard areas. So this is an exception to proposing standard ADUs within the city. So the minimum allowed per HCD is 800 square feet for a unit. So we proposed, so current standards allow these 800 square foot units to reside in these areas because they are sensitive areas for development.
Okay. Well, that answered my big global questions. There were a couple other questions in which the Mulholland Build letterhead and the second and third bullet points. Could you answer those questions? We answered the first one already.
Yeah, certainly, Commissioner Bauke. So I'll go ahead and read the second question out loud if that's all right.
Please.
The question asks, why do ADUs above garages have more leeway for maximum height than two-story ADUs? Seems to favor car drivers over mass transit users. And staff's response to this question is that ADUs over garages are frequently requested carriage houses. ADU configuration for homeowners who want to provide off-street parking. And for the third question from Mulholland Build, is the 18-foot plus the 2-foot max height is much better than the 16-foot, that's current, but with a moderate 4 and 12 pitch on a primary residence and having to elevate the ground floor of an ADU enough for site drainage, this person would need more like 22 feet to have 2 stories and match the roof pitch. And staff's response to this question is a standard ADU may be allowed higher than 18 feet to match the existing residence. But Commissioner Bauke, do you have any specific questions that I can?
My question on that one is basically an architectural question about matching, roof pitches. If the roof pitch ends up being less than what the state allows, I mean, if the applicant wants to go above, and you have basically no jurisdiction to say you can't go 2 feet higher and below the matching pitch. Is that correct? I mean, we have no ability to say do 4 and 12 on your ADU since you have 4 and 12 on your house. If it ends up being over the 25, then you say no, you have to lower it. But so there's really no design discretion, is what I'm trying to understand here. Is that correct?
Commissioner Bauke, there is a list of ministerial design criteria in the ADU ordinance that does require the ADU to match the architectural style, materials, and roof pitch of the existing house. So that's not necessarily the height, goes to the height, but it talks about the style. So there is some a requirement to match.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's helpful. I think between Vice Chair Bonderson's questions and the ones I had before, I think I'm down to none. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. Commissioner Higgins?
So different questions. Of the applications, 900 or some odd, how many are occupied?
Commissioner Higgins, we're going to find that data for you. So if we may get back to you on that specific question, if you'd allow us.
Okay, that's fine. Commissioner Lodge has a cheat sheet here. She's done her homework. She's telling me there's 408 completed, so it's less than half. So I guess I don't want to chase Commissioner Bonderson's I think overall question today, but I sort of set that up that it sounds like the process is still pretty tedious and difficult for applicants. We're trying to really not do a one-size-fits-all thing. I get that. Can you talk about the fees? Can you explain? Do you have any idea what the total fees are, kind of on average for these, both planning and building and connections? I apologize. I should have asked you that question ahead of the hearing.
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Higgins, we don't have that information with us right now. I'll follow up because we did gather that information for the housing element if I can find it in the meantime, if it's somewhere that I don't recall. One of the things we hear from some applicants is they're surprised at the construction costs as well. So it's not just permitting costs, but these are very expensive to build.
Yeah, understand that. Yeah, anecdotally, I had somebody tell me their building permit plan check fees were over 25 grand, so it's like a pretty big number. And I think that's kind of in context, though, of what we're talking about here. I'm inclined to make things more flexible, easier. I'm not quite following the distinction on the height for only single level. What's the difference? If we want to have a stacked or two-level ADU, should be able to be 2 units if architecturally it's going to meet what's on site. So that's where I'm at. That's, sorry, not a question, I'm out of line.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had many of the same questions as Chair Bonderson, as staff knows. And it's somehow the rules don't make a great deal of sense, but that's what they are. And I gather that staff questioned some of these things when the legislation was being prepared. I'm glad to see representatives from the fire department here. As some of you that have been around for a while know that I've been very concerned about increasing density in the high fire zones. Now, as I recall, JDUs are allowed in the, do we still have 2 separate high fire zones, the extreme and the high fire?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Lodge, nice to see you. It's been a while. The way the high fire hazard areas are determined through the city is there's 4 separate zones. There's the foothill and the foothill extreme, depicted by the yellow and the pink there.
Okay.
There's also coastal and coastal interior zones. That's the kind of light purple and the light blue zones, clearly more toward the ocean. These areas are defined by CAL FIRE and adopted by us as well as special zones within the city that obviously pose a higher fire danger. Within those zones, there's different areas and different criteria that we look at that really kind of go hand in hand with both planning department, community development, building department, and proposed projects. For example, our access, the topography, the climate is a lot different in the foothill and the extreme foothill zones than it is in the coastal and coastal interior zones. Therefore, limiting the size in the foothill and the extreme foothill zones of special ADUs to 800 square feet actually reduces the number of residents, cars, traffic, our evacuation routes when incidents occur in those areas. Not limiting the size to 800 feet in the coastal and coastal interior zone was decided because the infrastructure is much easier there for evacuations, the water supply is better, the streets are wider, even the chaparral and the vegetation is different in that area, there's different fire behavior there. So really when it comes to ADUs, a lot of the requirements that we've helped with planning to impose is really for that foothill and extreme foothill zone.
Okay, well, and that's the area that I'm particularly concerned about. When, early on, when there started, get this water picture out of the way, when some of the first, the big splurge toward it when the ordinance was changed so that many more people were able to consider and propose ADUs. A third of the map that the city had online, a third of the ADUs were proposed or built in the high fire zones and in the foothill, high and extreme fire zones. But it looks as if, as a percentage, that has gone way down. I think Was it 19% are?
Commissioner
yes.
Lodge, yes, so 19% of our ADU projects since 2017 have occurred in the, or have been built in the extreme foothill and the foothill areas.
Okay. It still is concerning to me, even if it, you know, a JDU is a lot smaller than a standard ADU, but it's still another person, at least one more person and one more car. And as some of you know, I've had some experience evacuating, when having to evacuate quickly, and it was easy to see how there could be some really disastrous results if it continues to increase in density. But, and this was before the ADU ordinance and before these that were built, that they became much more readily approvable. You had a pie chart, Ms. Ferguson, showing all of the proposed, the permitted and under construction, and the completed ADUs. The one that's online is just for the completed ADUs. And it shows that 72% of them are conversions, which means that from the street anyway, there's no change. And has there, but now, well, I think you said 66% are conversions now. Is there did people kind of pick the low-hanging fruit, the easier thing to do, converting a garage, for example, early on, and now it's more toward new construction or additions? Is there a trend that you're aware of and what's happening?
That's a fantastic question, Commissioner Lodge. I would like to defer this question to Brenda Beltz because she has so much hands-on experience processing these permits and have watched them occur over the years. So I think that she can give you a better understanding of the patterns.
Commissioner Lodge, I think the difference between the two pie charts is the one that is in staff's presentation is just total applications.
Right.
And it sounds like you're looking at a different pie chart that's showing total completed. And if I understand your question is there's more conversions completed than new construction.
Yeah, it's a higher percentage
Yeah.
of the completed, 72%. It's almost 3/4 that the completed that are conversions. But
Yeah,
you
I
take
would,
all of it. Yes, I understood that this and the 66% is for everything that's in the pipeline, shall we
right.
say.
And I would agree that the cost of construction and the permitting fees, everything is much easier for a conversion than for new construction.
Okay. Is the fire department comfortable with what's happening in terms of, I mean, you don't, I know you don't have a say over it, but do you see increased hazard with the increased density?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Lodge, thank you for elaborating on your question. That was, there's an overall concern from the fire department's standpoint of increasing density, especially in the foothill and high fire zone or
Right.
extreme foothill zones. I think the evidence is pretty prevalent. Unfortunately, we're not immune to wildfires in our community. As you alluded to earlier, it's even hard to drive your sedan in the Riviera area at 2 o'clock on any given weekday afternoon when there's an evacuation and fire apparatus is trying to get up and residents are trying to get out. It can get very scary. It can delay our response. It can add to an already panicked situation, and that's due to density and how many cars and people are in the area. So do I think ADUs should be built in those areas if they meet the criteria. But we need to, and that's why we have a close working relationship with the building and planning department to understand what that criteria can look like to both satisfy applicants' needs, but also the greater public safety, especially in those areas. So that's
well, you
that's
can-
kind of our stance. You know, a lot of those parcels in the foothill areas are larger too, and it's not uncommon for a lot of these special ADUs to be tucked away farther in properties on parcels, and that poses other problems for us too, and not just a wildfire situation, but what I would deem common emergencies that happen. So there's pluses and minuses in both directions, but from an overall community standpoint, lessening the density in those specific areas is really going to help the fire department when it comes to especially wildland fires, but any other natural disaster for that matter.
Yeah. Okay. Some time ago, I came across a requirement that new construction had to be within 500 feet of a fire hydrant. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah,
Okay, so you're having issues with ADUs being built on properties where it's further than that? Can people get around that requirement, or do they?
Yeah, good question, Commissioner Lodge. Without getting into too much details, I'll give you kind of the kind of deal breakers for a lot of people when it comes to ADUs on larger lots. The state limits what we can do from a plan check standpoint when it comes to ADUs. So obviously they're encouraging the housing throughout the state. So currently, ADUs do not have to be outfitted with a fire sprinkler system. That is all other brand new construction in the state, commercial or residential, has to have a fire sprinkler system in it. So folks building those special ADUs, especially in the high fire hazard area or any other ADU in the city, does not have to have it outfitted with a fire sprinkler system. Now, they still have to meet our water and access requirements. And what I mean by that is the 500 feet to a fire hydrant. Also, that our apparatus can get on the property if need be to within 150 feet of the furthest portion of the structure. So think of it like this. If I were to pull up to your house, I need to be able to pull off 150 feet pre-connected fire hose off the back of the fire engine and get to the farthest point of the structure on the property. So when you stick those ADUs in the farthest part, the back of the parcel, especially the large parcels, it's hard for some people to meet that access. Now, there is a stipulation within the state that says we can make those people put fire sprinklers in those ADUs if they don't meet our access or water requirements. And when we've had some of those come through, the majority of the parcels in the downtown area and the coastal area meet our access and water requirements already just by the size of the parcel. But it takes another level of review for us, especially on those larger parcels in the foothill and extreme foothill areas, to see if they meet those requirements, and if we have to implement some mitigating factors for them to be able to build on that site.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies a lot of that. As I recall, the initial state legislation allowed for fire safety reasons for communities to ban them in the high fire zones, but that is no longer true?
Commissioner Lodge, I have to be honest with you, there's been so many iterations from the state on ADUs. I might have to defer to City Attorney Tava on that, but from my understanding, it's always been that it's been hands-off as far as implementing fire sprinklers inside of a structure, but these structures always had to meet water and access requirements of the local jurisdiction. So jurisdictions have different requirements based off the kind of apparatus they have and their responses. And so Santa Barbara County might have a longer access requirement than we do. They might have a longer distance of a fire hydrant than we do, or shorter. So the state really left it to the local jurisdictions and per their ordinances on access and water to implement into the new ADU projects. So it's gone back and forth, but from my understanding, we've never been able to outlaw ADUs or special ADUs, but we could limit the size to 800 feet for a special ADU in the foothill and extreme foothill zones.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know there are requirements on construction to make them fire resistant, the new units, but I don't know of any way to make people fire resistant. And that's what I'm concerned about. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Wardlow?
Thank you, Chair. So I have some broad question to start. Is the intent of the ADU policy to have these new either conversions, constructions, are they supposed to be intended for rental housing? Like, is that the policy goal, or is the idea that these can just be constructed and then people can just put clothes in them, or they can just use them for granny flats when, you know, somebody from a distant relative visits, or is this really intended for rental housing? I've heard mixed things on this topic, so that's why I just wanted to get an answer.
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wardlow, our local intent is rental housing. We don't have anything that mandates that it be rental housing. These units cannot be converted to condominiums. So some of them serve as extensions of the household, so it could be members of the household that are in these units that aren't necessarily paying rent, but that's our local intent.
Do we have a sense of how many of the ADUs that we've discussed over, since 2017 are being rented?
We did do a survey. We got about 50 respondents of the 400 or 500 units that are out there, and it was a mix, and generally divided into 3 categories. One just completely vacant, just extra space for the house. One that's rented at market rate to tenants, and one provided for family and friends for no rent at all.
Okay. And I assume we don't have any way to incentivize or encourage or obviously not mandate that, as more of these, as more properties have ADUs, either convert, that they do go towards rental housing, or that we could incentivize that or something. Is that an option?
That's something that we intend to explore with implementation of the housing element. We do identify this as an opportunity and a need to do that, and we are looking at incentives. So, and Commissioner Bonderson had asked if we'll be, revisiting our ADU rules, and it is a program in the housing element to do so, to facilitate ADUs and their use as rental units.
Okay, thank you. Going into some more specific aspects, and I apologize if this was covered while I was out. The 25-foot height limit, can you just explain to me what circumstances would allow that versus just the 18-foot as a max across the board?
Commissioner Wardlow, thank you for that question. So the only difference is that it's attached, pretty much. So the state is now allowing any ADU that is attached be 25 feet now.
And if we as a community decided that we thought 25 feet was too high, we could continue to limit it to the 18 and just keep it consistent across the board?
No, we cannot.
Oh, no.
So as a state requirement, we always have to do as the state imposes.
So now 25 is, there's no going around it. 25 is the max now for anything attached.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, sorry for the confusion. And then the open yard reduction, is this more of just a simplistic aspect of like if a property owner wants to do something that simple, the fact that it has to go through such a massive permitting process, it would be easier for staff and property owners if we just dealt with it upfront this way?
Commissioner Wardlow, I'm just pulling up that slide at the moment. So I'm sorry, excuse me.
I was just
Commissioner
clarifying
Warlow,
that the
yes.
open yard reduction, the reason that this is coming forward, is this more of a streamlining process aspect where when you have a property owner that wants to do something quite simple, like putting in a, like I think you said, a staircase or something, that this is a simple addition and that instead of us making them go through a long process and staff, that this would be an easier fix if we address it this way?
Right. So the current standards allow an ADU to reduce the open yard standards that serves the ADU. However, the primary unit in blue still has to maintain or still requires to adhere to the 1250 minimum open yard area. So historically, we've received, and this is based on anecdotal evidence that we've received, that there have been some applicants that have wanted just, just a very simple addition, whether that be for bike storage or for a staircase or for laundry. And so now we're trying to make it a little bit easier for them to have this 150 square foot addition without requiring a modification.
Okay, wonderful. And I think the other commissioners answered my question, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions and then turn it back to my colleagues if there's anything left to ask. So one of the changes, I'm forgetting if it's per state law or one of our suggestions, I think it's per state law, but it was regarding the upper story of a mixed development, turning commercial into ADUs. What is the limiting factor that determines how many ADUs they can put in that commercial space? Is it, I'm trying to figure out, like, if there's a very large second floor of commercial space, are we just gonna have very few, very large units that then turn into kind of luxury rentals? Or are we able to put many more smaller units in there that is kind of the adaptive reuse idea, right? Is this our path? I guess my question is this our pathway to adaptive reuse of commercial spaces?
Chair Escobedo, that's a fantastic question. So this one, I think, is going to require Brenda Belts to weigh in.
Hello, Chair Escobedo. So it's the same section of the code that allows the garage conversion. So you could have 2 and up to 25% of the existing number of units converted. There is no maximum size on conversions. So to your question about limiting the size, that could be a possibility.
So if I'm understanding it, it would be 2, like for the commercial space.
2 would be the minimum, and if it's a mixed-use building and you had a lot of residential units, it could go up to 25% of the existing number of units. So it could be more than 2, depending on how many units are in that mixed-use project.
A follow-up question, and I apologize, it's kind of putting you on the spot. Are there changes that we can make to that portion of the zoning code to allow more units or to incentivize more units above the 2? Like we know 2 is the base, it sounds like, depending on other conditions. But is there additional language we can put in there to kind of open a pathway to where that we would get more units?
Yes, you could make that recommendation, because this is not a state mandate. This is just our own local incentive, so
Okay.
you could make it a greater incentive.
So if we provided, for the purposes of today, I doubt we want to spend time crafting exact language. We could give general direction like that, and then staff would then take that to ordinance committee, is that right?
Chair Escobedo, it sounds like those might be changes to the ordinance that would fit better under the housing element amendments, just because I think they could be pretty complicated to craft. And so we do want to move these forward to get them approved as soon after January 1st as possible, so that when the state law goes into effect, our ordinance is ready as soon as possible. But I think those are the types of things that we would be looking at through the housing element to help incentivize additional housing.
Okay, and maybe as we're moving through other questions and our deliberations, I'll probably return to you at the end of deliberations. If something comes to mind on something easy for us to add to that portion of the zoning code, I'll ask for that, and if not, then we'll save it for the future discussions for the housing element. Thank you. Do we have a public?
Chair Escobedo, I just wanted to follow up on Commissioner Higgins' question about building fees, because we do have that in our draft housing element. So there's one example in the back of the draft housing element. It's a 462 square foot unit, and it's a conversion and partial addition, but the costing for building permit is just under $10,000 for that, and that includes school fees.
Thank you. 1 second. So that's my last question. I believe we have Commissioner Bauke, and then we will go to Commissioner Lodge, and then Vice Chair Bonderson.
Mr. Chair, I've got one more question of staff. Could you put slide 24 back up? It just triggered the question, and I was reading through the ordinance and trying to find, well, can that be done? In this particular example, you have a ADU over a two-car garage. Can that be done in the category of special ADU in the foothill area? It's sort of I wasn't quite sure if that could or couldn't be done.
Apologies for my very short answer, Commissioner Bauke, but no, it's not allowed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is in relationship to your question about adaptive reuse of commercial space. My understanding is that there is a project that is going forward, which is to occupy the upstairs of what used to be Sur la Table, and that it was going to be divided into many small units. But I would assume that would be under multiple use rather than ADU regulations. I don't know. They've been working on it for a while. So
Yes, Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Lodge, yes, that is correct. I believe that was proposed under standard zoning regulations. So for any project, if they wanted to convert the second story, they could always use the city's multifamily unit rules as a way to move that forward. I think one of the reasons that sometimes the ADUs, people want to use that is because there's no open yard requirement. So that's one of the differences. So that might make it a little bit easier to get the unit in there.
okay, as I understand it, what was proposed would, since the lots on State Street tend to be rather deep, the two units that front on State Street and the two units that front on the back of the property and overlook the parking lot or whatever's behind it would be the only ones that would have windows and light and air, and everything else would be dependent on the electric power staying on for ventilation and so on. We need the housing, but that kind, I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Vice Chair Bonderson?
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. And I just want to finish Commissioner Lodge's statement. We don't want housing without light and air. And I mean, we have to be diligent about how we move forward. I'm in complete agreement with you. The questions I have are based on questions that took place in the conversation that took place after I had my turn. So I would like to go back and if I can't see the audience, but if our fire chief is still with us, I'd love to ask a question. Is he still available?
You got a promotion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know his role. Please help me.
You're fine. I'm Ryan DiGiulio. I'm the fire marshal and the battalion chief here.
Fire Marshal, nice to have you here. Thank you. Actually, having you here is quite useful. I appreciate your presence. I personally am very passionate and about this issue. When I was just 13 years old, I lived through the 1990 Painted Cave fire. My family was evacuated. My whole neighborhood burnt down. And we didn't have the time to get out until the fire was in my front yard. So you can imagine the congestion getting down the hill. And that was at a time where there wasn't a lot of density. And now we're looking at ways of adding housing and certainly an area where a car would be required because we're not near. I mean, of course, that's in the county, but I'm looking at other neighborhoods. And at the same time, I am personally conflicted with the fact that a neighborhood in the foothills has the physical land and has the ability to easily have open yard and parking without congesting streets and so on and so forth. And I wanted to specifically ask you, in order to make these properties safer and, let's say, more helpful to the fire department, can a fire hydrant be part of future projects? If there's, we require curb cuts, we require changes to public improvements to the street and so on. Could a fire hydrant within, I believe you said 150 feet, be an added requirement at the street?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Bonderson, good question. We already require projects that don't fit into our water requirements to install a fire hydrant, whether that's a commercial project or a residential project. It's rare in downtown just because of the grid system and the parcel sizes that are there. For instance, sometimes we'll get a flag lot or a deep lot project mid-block downtown that won't meet that requirement, and they'll have to install a commercial fire hydrant in there. It does happen on residential projects. As a blanket statement of just adding more fire hydrants in the high fire hazard area, if that's going to help with overall fire safety, the answer is yes and no. Yes, being that it could be easier for us to access a hydrant that's closer to a issue or an incident that's taking place, which could save us time. Of course, on larger wildfires or large-scale incidents, that's one more hydrant that can get water tapped out of it. So if you think of it as 60 fire engines tapping into 60 fire hydrants in the high fire hazard area, AKA the T fire or the Jesucita fire, the demand on the system is incredible. And there's been incidents where I've opened up a fire hydrant during those fires and you just hear air going by because there's no more water left in the system. So,
How upsetting.
yes.
I feel that when you speak.
So it can be beneficial. Our stance in the fire department is a little bit more proactive with the actual parcel owners themselves to harden their existing home. They already have to build to high fire hazard construction standards laid out in the building code to maintain their vegetation on their property, to do vegetation management programs within the high fire hazard area. So it's more of a holistic approach instead of let's put some fire hydrants in there and we should be good. Hopefully that answers your question.
It certainly does, and I'm very sensitive to your response. Thank you. My other question, which I again feel so conflicted about, is the limitation of these ADUs in the high fire areas being limited to 800 square feet, because in some areas, of course, this is not applicable necessarily in the high density area of the Riviera, but higher up where there's land, limiting the ADU to a size requirement like 800 square feet, to me feels like a conflict in the sense that we have the land and a larger family could rent or could live, allowing them to have more bedrooms for more children and they all pile into a single car. Now, I know we can't tell a family how many cars to have, and we can't pay attention to how many kids they have versus how many renters they have. But in your personal opinion, and this is just an opinion question, sir, would that type of limitation between 800 square feet and 1,200 square feet make a significant impact on traffic congestion coming down in an emergency?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Bonderson, in my opinion, it could, yes. By looking at only adding 400 square feet, that could be another bedroom. That's another bedroom that could be rented out to 1 or 2 people. And you're correct, we can't control what happens in a special ADU or how many people are living inside of an ADU. So by even opening the door to a larger square foot residence, you're basically saying you can have more people inside of there. Now, whether it's a single family that can all get into one car or not, we have no way of disseminating that information. But even having that opportunity, we didn't feel comfortable with increasing the potential density in those areas. So that's why we came up with the 800 square foot requirement with our colleagues over at the Planning and Building Department.
Thank you very much. I don't know when I would have another opportunity to ask you these types of questions directly, and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to move on to the next question, and that has to do with a question that was presented more than once, actually, in public comment. And it has to do with document review. The fact that state law does not require ADUs to be designed and executed by qualified licensed architects, and therefore project documents can be prepared by any individual with or without architectural licensing or experience. The question I have is, we can't necessarily limit or control who's doing the design if that's the way that we've worded it, but the public comment talks more in detail about staffing or creating a position for a city architect. Now, this is not by any means to discredit Ms. Belts. I understand that you are our chief ADU specialist at the city, and this is not to in any way be personal against you. But the question here, and I'm going to simply read it, it says that for many years, it has been encouraged the city to hire someone with an educational background to read architectural plans to ensure quality of new construction is maintained as intended by the ordinance without undue delays in processing applications. And for that, the idea of a city architect, because other cities have city architects on staff, I wanted to ask the question of staff to whoever may be best to answer. Has there ever been a discussion to create a position like this, or
Vice Chair Bonderson, I'm going to have to interject. I think that's going a little too far away from what we're supposed to be discussing today.
Oh, I did not realize that. Thank you for the interjection. I will keep my curiosities to myself. And I think I have one question left. Let me just make sure. Oh, yes. It was to follow up on Chair Escobedo's question about the adaptable reuse. And it was simply having to do with open yard. I do not recall, and I was looking through my paperwork here and quickly trying to find it, but I did not find it. Open yard on existing structures, is there an exemption to open yard on projects like that, and or can they be placed on the rooftop?
Vice Chair Bonderson. So you're referring to the conversion of existing upper floor commercial areas?
Yes, you got it.
So they wouldn't be placed on the rooftop because the units themselves would be within the existing floor area, and ADUs themselves don't require any open yard. So no new open yard areas would be required, and the unit would be within the existing floor area.
Excellent. That's all I needed to hear to make sure I completely understood, and I couldn't find it, so I'm glad you clarified. Thank you. That concludes my questions. Chair Escobedo, thank you for the extra time.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. I have one more question before we go to deliberations, and it is about time of implementation. So one of the reasons why we have other parts of Title 28 that we would love to update is because of the time it takes and the effort it takes. So with January 1st coming around the corner, are we anticipating period of time in which we will just default to state law and not have our ordinance implemented in the coastal zone?
Chair Escobedo, this is something that our staff has been discussing for quite some time, and I think that the best person to answer your question, it would be our Assistant City Attorney, Tava.
Chair Escobedo, yes, we will go for any portion of our ordinance in Title 28 that is contrary to state law, we'll follow state law in the coastal zone until we could get the Title 28 certified.
Okay. And in the past, because we've done, it seems like every year we have to do this, unfortunately.
Every year for the last 6 years.
Yeah.
It's like-
So about how long does it take to get the thumbs up from Coastal
California
Commission?
Coastal
Yeah.
Commission? It can take anywhere from 6 months to a year on average.
So sometimes we don't even have the approval before we're trying to implement the next. I appreciate you all so much.
And Chair Escobedo, I want to be clear. There, in the new legislation, it specifically says that we can apply our existing ordinance. It's only those portions of the ordinance that are contrary to state law that we have to follow state law, whereas under the prior, before we did the last Title 28, we were just blanket applying state law. So we at least have some of our protections in place, but for things like height, those will apply in the coastal zone, and it'll be different than what we just had certified by the commission.
Thank you for that clarification. That's really helpful. Again, I appreciate you all. All right, so we will turn it back to the commission for deliberations. Who wants to kick us off?
I'd like to, if it's,
Vice Chair
nobody's like to-
Bonderson, kick us off, and then we will turn to Commissioner Higgins.
thank you. As you can see, I'm very passionate about this topic. It's something that I am working on and working with daily. And so there's a few things I'd like to talk about with regard to the questions we've asked and open it up to perhaps discussion amongst us here with my fellow colleagues. The first one I'd like to talk about is the two-story ADU opportunity that if we are allowed to build on 2 stories, to be able to expand the opportunity to have 2 separate ADUs to give us 2 separate housing opportunities to house an additional family. That to me seems like an opportunity that we can take advantage of here. The next topic I'd like to discuss, if you're all open to it, is finding easier, more feasible, smoother pathways when there are very unique zoning situations, such as the one I expressed earlier, that literally the boundary of the property line is the difference between 2 zones. And if they were just on the other side of that line, they could have had a very easy, smooth sailing through process. But because they're on this side, they have to ask for mods, they have to jump through several more hurdles, and it just exhausts finances and projects die. That's where projects go to die. And I'd like to make sure that if there is a way that we can do that with discretion, that there would be easier zoning opportunities, I should say, exceptions made to very obvious zoning situations to create opportunities. I would also like to know if this is the correct, from Ms. Ostringer's response earlier, I believe that this is the opportunity to discuss anything having to do with ADUs. So if this is open, I'd like to add here.
But Vice Chair
perhaps-
Bonderson, if I
Yeah.
may, I think the
Yeah, of course.
consensus we came to is that the opportunity, because there's such a tight timeline to submit this
Yeah.
to Coastal Commission, the opportunity to focus on those types of changes to the ADU ordinance is going to be through the implementation of the
housing
housing
element.
element. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess what I've said so far, the two I've said so far, I'm assuming that the zoning process would not be here. It would be in the housing element. Would you agree?
Correct. Correct.
Okay, so let me go back to point number one, which is the two-story option, which was in this presentation. So I'd like to leave that one on the table
Yes.
if possible. And the fire, I'd like to also include a discussion on ways that we could maximize opportunities in the fire areas that have been outlined today, to maybe find ways that we could add opportunities for housing and still be sensitive to, keeping us safe and what the fire marshal has shared with us. I want to really specifically say that there are areas within the city where we have more freedom and flexibility to develop, where that congestion and that density wouldn't be as much of a concern. And that being said, an example of a concern area would be the Riviera, but there's other areas that would not be as high of a concern that I'd like to put back on the table. I feel like I need to stop there for the moment in order to recollect my thoughts, because honestly, I had other things on my list and I would like to stop, but I'd like the opportunity to come back.
Sounds great. Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. Commissioner
Thank
Higgins.
you as well.
I'm comfortable moving what we have here to the next level, unadulterated, although I could be convinced to straw poll on the concept that Commissioner Bonderson brought up about the 2 units stacked. But just noting that there's going to be another opportunity to take a more holistic look at ADU procedures in the housing element, I think is, and you're given timeline now to get this done before the state law comes into effect is important. So I'm ready to go.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with Commissioner Higgins.
All right. Commissioner Bauke?
Mr. Chair, I'll put my thoughts out there. Most of this will probably land in the housing element update category, but I'm very much a supporter of ADUs, and I think we need to be more proactive on implementation instead of reactive to the state. So let's get our thinking hats on and figure out how we can do more of this, because to meet our housing needs community-wide, it's the low-hanging fruit. The hard stuff is to do high-density, multifamily type stuff. It's the small, one at a time, 1 or 2 per lot. For the citywide, you get more bang for your buck, and actually it's more gradual to come about. So with that, I'd like to see, when we discuss things on ADUs, a discussion to allow ADUs on over garages in the high fire areas to the extent they can meet fire code requirements. I think that's a lost opportunity for one. So I think that's sort of the gist of my comments, and I will be supporting the motion, and I think it's best to get this moving and start working on this stuff more globally in the housing element. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. Commissioner Wortha?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I'm very supportive of the amendments that have been put forward, and I really appreciate all of staff's work on this. I know this is a lot, so I'm excited to see where this goes. I also want to thank our fire marshal for his remarks. I think that was really helpful context in understanding that you are working hand in hand with planning to make sure that any of the ADUs that are going in, and that you've created this criteria of special ADUs to ensure that they are not only going to be like compliant and up to code, but that really that the new constructions will hopefully provide a little bit more security because they actually have all that infrastructure. So that was super helpful for me, so thank you. And then I'm very supportive of Chair Escobedo's comments. I'd love to see that and have that further discussion in the housing element, as well as what Commissioner Bauke just mentioned in terms of the upstairs ADUs in the fire hazard zones. And then other than that, I just really appreciate everyone's work on this. And I do look forward to discussing more of the ins and outs during the housing element on how we can really, if there are opportunities, and my specific interest is around if there are opportunities for us to incentivize or streamline projects that are going to be tagged or definitely going to be used as rental properties, because I think that really can help us get at our broader goals if we're really ensuring that all this work we're doing around ADUs are actually going to become rentals. So I look forward to talking with you all about that, and thank you again.
Thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. Vice Chair Bonderson, are you ready to give remarks? And if not, I can go.
Thank you. Yes. I also would love to support moving this forward. I think speed is of the utmost importance here. So I hope that nobody amongst my colleagues or staff felt that I was trying to slow anything down. I just have a lot of questions and a lot of ideas, which you'll hear again when it comes back with the housing during the housing element. But I do want to make sure that we can address an opportunity here to provide more leniency and opportunity to allow for 2 units stacked if the property allows for that. I also want to make sure that we address here the idea of the height when on a hillside. Now, I know that the city has hillside policies in place. I forgot to ask, and I know that it's not the time to ask this question, but because the question time has passed, but I would like to believe that any project coming through that is on a hillside would then thus be sensitive to privacy and hillside construction, not just slapping heights on everywhere with the maximum just because it's allowable. And that being said, I'm in support of moving this forward. So if there's any room to include stacking or hillside concerns, I would love to, make a recommendation to pay attention to those 2 things.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson.
Thank you.
I think for the stacking, a question I have for staff is, I know privacy was a big concern as it relates to this. My thought is that's probably a pretty big topic of concern for folks in the community and may demand more robust conversation around that topic. But from staff's perspective, is that something we can discuss in the housing element implementation period? And is that something we would commit to?
Chair Escobedo, we could certainly revisit it with the housing element. Part of staff's thinking was the 18-foot height limit too. So you can do 7-foot ceiling heights, but you'd end up with a flat roof that might be difficult in some neighborhoods. The idea behind the accessory dwelling units is it's light density added to existing neighborhoods. So, but we're open to those conversations moving forward with housing element implementation.
Thank you for that context. And Vice Chair Bonderson, does that satisfy your need or?
Yes, as long as there's an opportunity for us to address it in the future, that it's not off the table and it's not closed before it gets approved, or, the opportunity's there, I'm okay with moving forward today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. Once again, I just want to thank staff. Thank you to the Fire Marshal and the Fire Department for supporting these efforts. I think it's a really important partnership, clearly. 6 years in a row doing this, it's not fun, I imagine. And I commend you. This has been a great presentation. Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. And the staff report was well written. I'm going to support this moving forward. I said I would come back to you, but I'm just going to table it for implementation of the housing element. I won't be on Planning Commission, but I'll be in the public, and I'm hoping that you will investigate whether or not that's a possible avenue to use our commercial space and turn it into residential. And there may be fewer barriers in some instances for ADUs, as I think Ms. DeBusk highlighted one. And I'm hoping that if we have buildings built already and they're already a part of the fabric of our community, it may be easier to go adaptive reuse or integrate ADUs. And I'm hoping that's a part of some of our conversations in the future. I agree totally with many of the comments that Commissioner Balke made about the fact that this is low-hanging fruit for much of our community. It's a lot easier for folks to digest than a multi-unit building. And they're obviously happening far more frequently, and I'm also hoping in the implementation that there's a lot of discussion. And I know, being a part of that work group, that it definitely is the intention to make this process work. So with that and gratitude, I'm also going to turn it over to Commissioner, oh, you have your letter? Oh, sorry. I will open it up one more time to the commission, if there are any last minute comments or a motion for the commission to entertain. Commissioner Higgins.
Move it along to ordinance committee.
Second.
I can second.
So we have, everyone wants to get out of here. We have a motion from Commissioner Higgins, a second from Commissioner Lodge. Any discussion on the motion? All right. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Higgins,
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow,
Yes.
Commissioner Balke,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bonderson,
Yes.
and Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you very much. Thank you all so much for all that you do, and I look forward to working with you on ADUs from that podium over there. It'll be fun. And get 2 whole minutes. All right. So with that, we will close that item, and we will move on to, give me a second, our administrative agenda. And we have committee and liaison reports. And do we have a staff hearing officer liaison report? Mr. Higgins.
Mr. Chair, you have a couple of cancellations in the last 6 weeks. And one hearing a few weeks ago included ADUs in the coastal zone, and something I'm actually excited about. Finally, Mackenzie Market was before the staff hearing officer for front yard modification to get that restaurant renovated and occupied. So that'll be great for people in District 4 and 5.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Any other committee or liaison reports?
I have
Vice
one,
Chair,
if no
Vice Chair Bonderson.
Nobody else is in line. I haven't reported lately, so I have architectural review items. It's very interesting because we've had several weeks where there was nothing particularly pertaining to Planning Commission, but then one ABR that was almost all exclusively of interest. So let me quickly hit those. On October 31st, we had a continued item returning for project design approval, and that was 220 North La Cumbre Road, which I'd spoken about before. Just quickly, a reminder, it's a project that consists of demolition of all existing commercial buildings on site, construction of new 48-unit multifamily residential development. And it did receive project design approval with comments. Next, we have another continued item that came back again for project design approval. It was at 414 West Cannon Perdido Street. Quick reminder, it's a proposed project for a 2-story, 2-unit residential building using the AUD program. And it was also continued indefinitely with comments. The next one is also a continued item coming back for a revised project design approval. And that was at 513 De La Vina Street. The proposal is to convert an existing commercial building to 15 hotel units, of which 11 of those units will have kitchenettes and 4 will have full kitchens. So ultimately, those are designed for longer stay, and I know that that's something that we are often talking about, so I wanted to bring it to your attention. And this project received project design approval with comments. And last but not least, just wanted to mention that the police station was scheduled to come to ABR, was postponed, and was just seen on Monday. So I'll have more feedback on that one. And then the final project was seen on November 2nd, continued and received final approval just on consent November 14th. And that was for the intersection of Olive Mill Road, Coast Village Road, and Jamison Lane, which came to Planning Commission. So I thought you would be interested to know that it's received final approval at ABR. I also have a quick report from Transportation and Circulation Committee that you might be interested in. There was two specific things I wanted to bring to your attention. The first one is the Castillo Undercrossing bicycle and pedestrian facility improvements. That planning effort was reviewed, and there's a lot of forward movement. And the draft 5-year Public Works Street and Transportation Capital Improvement Program was summarized, and the fiscal year was discussed in a project like budget discussion. Last but not least, State Street Advisory Committee now officially has a dedicated website demonstrating any updates on the master plan. And I'm not going to spend any more time on it, but I want to let you all know that they are very, very actively having workshops and public open houses either on State Street or in different forums. And it's happening weekly and sometimes even daily. There's several back-to-back coming up at the end of November, this week, next week, and in December. So if any of you are interested, or if anyone is wanting to share these with the public, please don't hesitate to look at the website. There's a lot going on for the public to be made aware and participate. I happen to be on the 3 committees that have a lot going on at the moment. Sorry for a long-winded presentation.
No, those are great updates, and we appreciate it. Thank you, Vice Chair Wanderson. Any other updates from Commissioner Higgins?
Just an informational update. I wanted to let you all know the County of Santa Barbara is updating their housing element right now. And there's a workshop tonight in Goleta and online. Sorry, that's actually the Planning Commission hearing room downtown. But of note, in the South Coast area, they are proposing, staff at least at this point is proposing to rezone quite a few blocks of land in Nolita, and in particular South Patterson, the ag area down there. And that'll be an interesting process to watch because as of this juncture, there is no water for new development. So whether or not that sticks with HCD will be interesting, let alone a rezone process. So stay tuned on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Other committee or liaison reports? I'm not seeing any. So we will adjourn this meeting at 3:28. Everyone have a great day. Enjoy your holiday. Be safe. And happy Thanksgiving.